Great. Perfect. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session of The Void Writes by Angel Evangelidis. This workshop examines how writing is engendered by the void, and writing as the site where the void unfolds, even if unfolding is its only doing. Drawing on literature and philosophy, it asks what happens when form is not assumed to impose upon nothingness, but to arise from and through it. The seminar explores how the void necessitates form, why there is nothing that precedes creation, or rather, that nothing precedes creation and must itself be understood as something creative. Angel is a writer and researcher working at the intersections of literature and philosophy. They hold a PhD in literary, musical, and visual thought from the European Graduate School, where they graduated summa cum laude with Crushed Narrative, The Box, a hybrid theoretical creative work centered on the case of Robert Maudsley, who was held in solitary confinement for over 4 decades in a specially constructed glass cell. The work develops the concept of the crushed narrative, a narrative form that emerges from structural absence, silence, and the impossibility of speaking for the other, and yet from the imperative of attempting to do so. The book unfolds through a dual text structure in which literary theory and fiction appear side by side on the same page, confronting one another without synthesis, and treating confinement as an ontological condition of our world, rather than a biographical or psychological case. The novella The Stone, published in 2025, reimagines historical research as embodied narrative by returning to a series of suicides from the rock of the Acropolis in Athens. The work examines how suicide is translated into spatial, political, and bodily terms, blending documentary material and literary form to reflect on dwelling. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Angel. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I was thinking if we could have some introductions by you, but I think we're a bit too many to do this. So what I suggest instead, I would love to hear about your background, your research, and perhaps also why you're taking this workshop. So I'm sure we'll meet each other through our discussion here, and your questions or concerns, comments, objections. But I will welcome you to either upload a comment on Google Classroom, Discord, or send me an email so I can hear more about you. So let me just tell you what we're going to do today. I'm going to start with a presentation of about 30-35 minutes. Then we'll open the floor for, again, questions or concerns, comments, and we can have a discussion and think together. And then I will have another, perhaps we're going to take a short break after that, and then I'm going to continue the presentation. So we will start with Primo Levi. I will end the first part with Levinas, and then we will return to Primo Levi and some other things I have uploaded on Google Classroom. So let me just start. Oh, by the way, I have uploaded on Google Classroom the longer passages I'm going to refer to today. Perhaps this is helpful for you if you don't have the book in front of you. So let us just start with Primo Levi. So Primo Levi wrote If This Is a Man, a so-called memoir of his experiences in the Auschwitz Monowitz, or as it's known, the Buna labor camp in 1946, just a few years after his release. Levi was incarcerated because he was a Jew, of course, but also due to his activity with the Resistenza Italiana, a movement that fought the German occupying forces, but also the fascist Italian collaborators at the moment. Although Levi's shocking account is typically categorized as a memoir, we'll see how its singular truth emerges not from its ability to recall accurately, but rather from its literary effect, what as form lacks from it. Or, as Charlotte Delbo writes in her own account of the concentration camps, today, I'm quoting, "I'm not sure that what I wrote is true. I'm certain it is truthful." So we might ask ourselves, what is a memoir? Simply put, a memoir is a written account of one's own life experiences, often focusing on personal memories, reflections. The term originates from the Latin memoria, meaning to remember. A memoirist is someone who writes such an account, typically offering insights into historical events from their lived perspective. Even if we classify Levi's narrative as a memoir, it is rather the ambiguities and contradictions of the narrator that allow us to grasp it, even read it, I would claim. Levi's narrative goes beyond subjective recollection, something, as we're going to see, impossible in a concentration camp, and it manifests the inherent impossibility of being a subject in such moments of extreme suffering, in moments when someone is totally stripped of their subjectivity. Levi's narrative is formed from an outer impossibility, a voice that cannot be transcribed, that presses, though, upon the text and forms it. This is what I mean by, this is one side of what I mean by the void rights. The text, therefore, is not merely written, but mostly unwritten, or also unwritten by an invisible, yet material, in the form of dust, hand. So I'll start with the first quote. It's the first slide of the presentation. Morgen früh. What does this mean? So my question is if Primo Levi can write a memoir under these conditions. Is it possible for Levi to be a memoirist? Primo Levi, in this quote, explains how memory works in the camp. And he writes, "But who can seriously think about tomorrow? Memory is a curious instrument. Ever since I have been in the camp, 2 lines written by a friend of mine a long time ago have been running through my mind. These are the lines. Until one day, there will be no more sense in saying tomorrow." And Levi continues, "It is like that here. Do you know how one says never in camp slang? Morgen früh. Tomorrow morning." I'm not sharing my presentation, but you can open it and read the longer passages if that helps. So the meaning of the term never in this connection between morgen früh and never is inverted from its common use. If never refers, as we know, to all possible time, once all past experiences and all possible future ones. So that is, there exists no time under which such and such thing would take place. In the concentration camp, never is translated as tomorrow morning. What for most of us would be the natural phenomenon of tomorrow, the sun rising, is replaced by an impasse that repeats itself in the unfolding of time, or in the seeming of unfolding of time. For the inmate in the concentration camp, the sun itself embodies this impasse. It illuminates a world where time is stripped of duration, where neither retention nor pretension can take hold. The never, therefore, speaks from a non-present into a non-future. The melody of the world is out of joint. As you might have read, Levi's narrator, or you might have felt, Levi's narrator is shadowed by the weight of responsibility of only accidentally being a survivor, moved by this exteriority, by someone else who now has turned into dust and could have taken the place of the narrator. The voice of the narrator must always account for this dust. But how? My take is that this is not an ethical obligation, a sort of decision to account for the other, the lost. My claim here is that the narrative itself is not written by a subject, but by something quite different, a force of the collective experience, the impossibility of being a subject, but also the objective register of history. The narrative is written by the hand of Primo Levi, or of the narrator, with a second hand made out of dust. My claim is that neither of these two hands is capable of writing, and writing in the first place is never engendered in this way. Neither of the two hands is productive. It is only this being with two hands that is compelled to produce. As Blanchot has shown, the narrative is always different from what utters it. It is the indifferent difference that alters the personal voice, Blanchot writes. This is structurally true for any narrative. The memoir might be read prima facie as a testimony, but the narrator who is called to utter it is always other. Indeed, Primo Levi is simultaneously the author and hero of this testimony. This is quite obvious. Yet the first-person narrator is something quite different. A consideration of Levi's account as memoir, for me, would otherwise reduce its literary effect and force, its truth. Let's start reading the text and to try to see what's happening. We start with the image of the train. This striking image of the Jew that is forced to become a union of non-destination. Levi writes, on the morning of the 21st, we learned that on the following days, the Jews would be leaving, all the Jews, without exception, even the children, even the old, even the ill. Our destination, nobody knew. In most cases, as Levi argues, the condemned human is given a special sacred space, a space to dwell. But this is not the case for the condemned Jew. If you go to the second slide, we're reading the second long passage. Levi writes, for people condemned to death, tradition prescribes an austere ceremony, calculated to emphasize that all passions and anger have died down, and that the act of justice represents only a sad duty towards society, which moves even the executioner to pity for the victim. Thus, the condemned man is shielded from all external cares. He is granted solitude, and should he want it, spiritual comfort. In short, care is taken that he should feel around him neither hatred nor arbitrariness, only necessity and justice, and by means of punishment, pardon. But to us, this was not granted, for we were many and time was short. And in any case, what had to be repent? For what crime did we need pardon? What is this crime? So the Jews instead are given a sending to a non-place. The Jew is once more the Semite, always on the move, the nomad. let us consider this phrase. And in any case, what had we to repent? For what crime did we need pardon? The Jew is stained as a criminal who has not yet committed a crime, but still punished to a constant search for said crime. So the crime is the searching itself. The criminal precedes the crime. The unvo that they are sent to emphasizes the impossible command to find or imagine the crime that they have not committed. As Milan Kundera explains along the same lines in analyzing Kafka's The Trial, the person punished does not know the reason for the punishment in Kafka's trial. The absurdity of the punishment is so unbearable that to find peace, the accused needs to find a justification for his penalty. The punishment has finally found the offense. So the punishment manifests as the relentless pursuit of a crime that has not been perpetrated. And this takes the form of a place, the concentration camp. For me, the train is the most crucial metaphor for the suffering of Jews. It is probably a metaphor as it transports, and in Greek, metaferi means precisely this, the Jews, but most importantly, it works as the vessel, the train, for Levi's dream. So Levi writes precisely this, that the train is a veil. Why? The train is also a cocoon structure, a structure that transforms its body. It makes the Jews one. It forces the crushedness of the Jews upon each other. And Levi is forced to hover between the eye of his narrator and a horrifying and necessary we. Ricardo, we can return to this comment about Salo. I think it's very interesting. Although I do have a problem with this movie. I think we can discuss this later. Let's read again from Levi. I think this is the third slide. There are few men who know how to go to their deaths with dignity, and often they are not those whom one would expect. Few know how to remain silent and respect the silence of others. Our restless sleep was often interrupted by noisy and futile disputes, by curses, by kicks and blows, blindly delivered to ward off some encroaching and inevitable contact. Then someone would light a candle, and its mournful flicker would reveal an obscure agitation, a human mass extended across the floor, confused and continuous, sluggish and aching, rising here and there in sudden convulsions and immediately collapsing again in exhaustion. The voice of the narrator is always a call from elsewhere, as we already claimed, an unknown calling that one must articulate through writing. One must unwrite to reach to this calling, a pursuit that borders on the impossible, at least in human terms. Primo Levi here articulates a we, or is forced to articulate a we, that seems to be internally broken, but simultaneously formed by the boundaries of the train. It is not a community, right? It is forced crushedness, let's call it, the common destiny of the journey and its borders. The disjointed body of the Jew, its discontinuous and multiple fragments are compressed by the shell of the train and the transformative necessity of becoming crushed. Primo Levi must unwrite himself as a narrator, or rather deny the shroud of the creator and tend to the voice that must be brought to light. Let us consider that Levi is the subject who inscribes a registrar, or the site through which the narrative of such objective history unpacks itself. There is no creator. It's this word I'm repeating here, crushed. This striking word repeats itself throughout Levi's book. The narrator finds himself crushed against other bodies in different situations. I'm reading the next quote. Next to me, crushed against me for the whole journey, there had been a woman. We had known each other for many years, and the misfortune had struck us together. It's a misfortune to be with someone, but we knew little of each other. Now, in the hour of decision, we said to each other things that are never said among the living. We said farewell, and it was short. Everybody said farewell to life through his neighbor. Let me repeat, everybody said farewell to life through his neighbor. We have no more fear. So the woman in this passage is crushed against the narrative. How one can incorporate her? How can one assume the responsibility of going beyond their own body? Levi's narrative is formed through this structural ambiguity. It is this hour of decision, as we just read. And what is this decision, if not, in German, Entscheidung, a certain cutting, a Scheiden, what one must leave behind in order to form oneself, one's narrative. And this is the crucial point here, how this crushing and cutting frames sleeping and dreams, dream work. Let's go to the next quote. I do not know who my neighbor is. I'm not even sure that it is always the same person, because I have never seen his face, except for a few seconds amidst the uproar of the reveil, so that I know his back and his feet much better than his face. He wraps himself in the blanket, pushes me aside with a blow from his bony hips, turns his back on me, and at once begins to snore. Back against back, I struggle to regain a reasonable area of the straw mattress. With the base of my back, I exercise a progressive pressure against his back. Then I turn around and try to push with my knees. I take hold of his ankles and try to place them a little further, so as not to have his feet next to my face. But it is all in vain. He is much heavier than me and seems turned to stone in his sleep. So before sleeping, or after, or while sleeping, crushed by the body of his neighbor, the narrator is trying to find his own boundaries, a frame that would allow him to dream as a first-person narrator. In a concentration camp, under these extreme circumstances, where one is stripped of their subjectivity, one always has a companion, a forced companion, the absolute other that they become and they are not. And most importantly, in their sleep. Let's read again. As Primo Levi writes, to have a bed companion of tall stature is a misfortune and means losing hours of sleep. I always have tall companions, as I am small, and two tall ones cannot sleep together. The body of your companion, therefore, is always there accompanying you. Who knows where our dream starts and ends when crushed upon the other? The neighbor, this neighbor, is the one that does not accompany you in framing your narrative. Let us proceed with a longer passage. It's the next slide. Levi writes, so I adapt myself to lie like this, forced into immobility, half lying on the wooden edge. Nevertheless, I'm so tired and stunned that I, too, soon fall asleep, and I seem to be sleeping on the tracks of a railroad. The train is about to arrive. One can hear the engine panting. It is my neighbor. I'm not yet so asleep as not to be aware of the double nature of the engine. The engine is puffing. It is even nearer. It is on the point of running over me, but instead it never arrives. My sleep is very light. It is a veil. If I want, I can tear it. I will do it. I want to tear it so that I can get off the railway track. Now I have done it, and now I'm awake, but not really awake, only a little more, one step higher on the ladder between the unconscious and the conscious. I have my eyes closed, and I do not want to open them. Let my sleep escape me. But I can register noises. I'm sure this distant whistle is real. It does not come from an engine in a dream. It can be heard objectively. This whistle is an important thing and in some ways essential. We have heard it so often associated with the suffering of the work and the camp that it has become a symbol and immediately evokes an image like certain music or smells. So some comments on this. First of all, is the narrator forced into immobility due to the body that crushes them, or due to an inner obligation, a necessity to account for, to immobilize the multiplicity of appearances within them? One is never only crushed by another, also by a wooden edge, an inanimate frame. Still, in a concentration camp, the horror allows for the animate to exchange places with the inanimate. Is there even a difference? There is no clear demarcation between object and subject. There are no objects out there. Is the narrator even another wooden edge? Secondly, the railroad could be read as the new origin story of the Jew. The narrative admits that the panting as image forced in the dream is in fact a neighbor. The whistle is the neighbor. The train that works as the absolute symbol for the machinic Semitic experience. The machine that kills a Semite because it transfers them without their walking, without the nomadic aspect of the Semite, the freedom that walking implies, getting lost. The engine becomes the panting of the neighbor, and the other never arrives. The train is constantly missed. The image always fails at some point. It cannot form itself. Is one really dreaming here? The narrative is crushed because the I cannot fully account for the other, the we, the shell of the train. This whistle must intervene. This forced crushedness, a we that symbolizes the absence of such community, at this point at least. A community without communion. It's purely a skeleton, already the image of death. Thirdly, if psychoanalysis for Lacan is only possible after the cogito, it is entailed that it is only after the cogito, in modernity, that the human can dream as a subject. What's going on here, though? Who is dreaming, and how can one dream in a concentration camp? Here, as we see, the subject fails. The narrative is cracked. The sleep, according to the narrator, is merely a veil or a memoir of what now is barely possible. It is at this point, when the narrator wakes up, that he fails. he experiences the inability to properly wake up. But as we're going to see, and as it is implied here, this dreamer is an objective dreamer, not a subject. And memory is registered objectively as historical material. What is recounted speaks in the neutral of objective suffering, a suffering without a subject. What is experienced is not an object. It is the experience of objective history, the inauguration of its text through a sharing in sleeping, by building the foundation of a common language for this text to be written. It is the community of the somnambulists that dares to find a language. Still, could this objective history be narrated? What we read in Primo Levi's account is precisely that objective history is what is missing from the narrative, what cannot be accounted for. And in this sense, objective history is pure form. Let's pause here and turn, pause from Primo Levi's text and turn to Levinas. And then we're going to pause for our discussion, our first discussion. So why is Levinas crucial here? Let's read the next long passage, the next slide. To be conscious, Levinas writes, is to be torn away from the there is. Since the existence of a consciousness constitutes a subjectivity, a subject of existence, that is, to some extent, a master of being, already a name in the anonymity of night. Horror is not an anxiety about death. In horror, a subject is stripped of his subjectivity, of his power to have private existence. The subject is depersonalized. Horror turns the subjectivity of the subject, his particularity qua entity, inside out. It is a participation in the there is, Ilia, in the there is which returns in the heart of every negation, in the there is that has no exits. It is, if we may say so, the impossibility of death, the universality of existence, even in its annihilation. Is it not what we just read, what Levinas describes, the non or subjectivity, the impossibility of subjectivity in a concentration camp? Is not that there is what is captured as history, or left uncaptured and silent, but resounding as effect by Levi's narrative? Let's see more carefully Levinas' argument. What is Levinas doing in this text that Blanchot thought was one of the most important contributions, philosophical contribution of Levinas, even in these 8-9 pages. So Levinas's there is, Ilia, names existence without existence. Existence, C, without existence, TS. Not this or that being, not a subject, not an object, a god, not even nothingness, but the anonymous fact that there is. It is being as impersonal event. Levinas's basic distinction is therefore between existence and existence. Before there is a stable someone or something, there is the anonymous happening of being. And we must take this logically, not chronologically. The there is, Ilia, is not another object hidden behind object. It is this anonymous field that remains when objects lose their contours. It is not something, but neither is it nothing. Levinas calls it a density of the void, a murmur of silence. It is closer to night, according to Levinas, insomnia, horror. Levinas here is writing against Heidegger. In Heidegger, anxiety discloses nothingness and exposes Dasein, the Dasein, to being toward death. Death, therefore, individualizes me. Anxiety tears me away from ordinary absorption and reveals my ownmost possibility. But even in this moment of anxiety, in this mood, in this experience, there's something else. And this is what Levinas' argument here. Levinas reverses Heidegger's point. The fundamental affect is not anxiety, but horror before being. And being has nothing to do with the subject, with Dasein, with the being toward death, because it has nothing to do with death. Horror does not say, I may cease to be. It says something more terrible. I cannot get out of being. Or rather, without an I, being is there. There is. Death itself is not experienced as liberation from being, because the there is, or something else even, because the there is returns in the heart of every negation, as Levinas writes. And he calls it the impossibility of death. We might call it life, even. The horrible persistence of existence, even in annihilation. So the problem is not finitude. The problem is irremissible being. Being that cannot be refused, escaped, or concealed. Insomnia is Levinas's most precise example. In ordinary, everyday attention, I attend to something. We have intentionality, intentional acts. In insomnia, this breaks down. Levinas says, in insomnia, the night itself watches. This means that wakefulness has become impersonal. I am no longer master of attention. I cannot withdraw, sleep, disappear, or take refuge in myself. I think I'm just reminded of what Samuel Beckett says. You are a nurse. There's no cure for that. There's no exit. So insomnia reveals that there is as being's refusal to let go. Sleep would be a retreat into privacy. Insomnia is the failure of that retreat. Being continues without me. But yet, I somehow feel this as an anonymous pressure. Perhaps I should rephrase it. It's not I that feel it, but it is felt through me. I think I missed a passage from Levinas. I'm sorry for this. This is the passage from the PowerPoint. Let's read it together. Page 31. Levinas is writing. When the forms of things are dissolved in the night, the darkness of the night, which is neither an object nor the quality of an object, invades like a presence. In the night, where we are riven to it, we are not dealing with anything. But this nothing is not that of pure nothingness. There's no longer this or that. There's not something. But this universal absence is in its turn a presence, an absolutely unavoidable presence. It is not the dialectical counterpart of absence, and we do not grasp it through a thought. It is immediately there. There's no discourse. Nothing responds to us but the silence. There is, in general, without it mattering what there is, without our being able to fix a substantive to this term. There is an impersonal form, like it rains or it is warm. Its anonymity is essential. The mind does not find itself faced with an apprehended exterior. The exterior, if one insists on this term, remains uncorrelated with an interior. So let me pause here. There is no outside and inside. There is no exteriority or interiority. It is no longer given. I continue with a quote. It is no longer a world. What we call the I is itself submerged by the night, invaded, depersonalized, stifled by it. The disappearance of all things and of the I leaves what cannot disappear, the sheer fact of being in which one participates, whether one wants to or not, without having taken the initiative anonymously. Being remains like a field of forces, like a heavy atmosphere belonging to no one, universal, returning in the midst of the negation which put it outside, and in all the powers to which that negation may be multiplied. So for Levinas, to be conscious is to tear oneself away from the there is, this hypostasis. Consciousness gives rise to subjectivity, a subject of existence who becomes, to some extent, as we said before, a master of being. And this is a name in this anonymity of night. I want to be very precise here, and perhaps somewhat critical of Levinas. Night is not enough. If we treat night, as Levinas, I think, sometimes does in this text, as a privileged example, we risk turning the there is into a metaphor, into what Hegel would call picture thinking. Darkness as the image of anonymous being. So sometimes here in this text, I think Levinas is assigning content as night to the there is. So what matters is not night as such, but as I understand it, insomnia. Night is crucial only insofar as it has a relation to the body of the human animal, to a necessity of sleeping. It is the time, if there is such time, or when there is such time, in which the body is supposed to sleep, to withdraw, to suspend consciousness, and in another sense, to return to a consciousness. The there is emerges when this suspension fails in insomnia. At this time, I do not simply remain awake. Wakefulness is no longer mine. The night watches, as Levinas writes. Insomnia awakes, we might say, or insomnia opens these imaginary boundaries of the body of the human animal. And the body is out there. The night is our stomach. This is the state I think Levinas is after. Not a subject contemplating darkness, of course, not darkness as a depersonalizing state as such, not darkness as the switching off of lights, not darkness as an image, but the subject stripped of the power to sleep. Once more, it seems to be a possible connection, just a possible connection for the human animal as this kind of animal that sleeps at night. The horror of the there is therefore not night as such, but the insomnic dragging at any time of the day. Consider, for example, a being such as the late Marcel Proust, who changed this. So it's the prolongation of existence beyond the body's possibility of interruption. The body is dragged in prolongation of existence as such. And allow me to make another observation. I'll just finish this. Perhaps in the form of a question to you. It's still an open question for me. So the there is seems to have a relation to language. I think that's right. It seems that it is not simply this impersonal being outside in an outside that is not outside, independent of language that Levinas describes. It seems that the phrase there is not without form. This form, if any, seems to carry, so to say, the imprint of the impersonal being it names. Of course, the phrase does not give us a subject. It does not assume the genesis of a subject, but it gives us something from which a subject might begin, or as I see it, even worse, from what is the subject is forced to begin, or even cannot begin without. So that there is not simply the limit of the subject, but as language, or as what cannot not assume a language, it inaugurates something. It seems to point to a certain beginning, even if this beginning is shaky and, of course, does not belong to an I. Let me stop here and open this virtual for questions, concerns, comments, objections, of course.
Angel, there's a question in the chat from Ricardo. I'm not sure if he wants to read it out or.
Ricardo, would you like to read it out, or? I can read it. Ricardo is writing, the self-evidence of Heidegger's existence is the caesura between the impossible narrative explored by Levi and the insomnia of Levinas. Okay. I'm not sure what you mean here. I would love some more some explanation on this, some elaboration, so I can reply. And then you write, I do not agree that there is language, but rather the bodies of those who die. Yes. But okay, I suppose you might mean some different things again here. The bodies of those who die. Do you mean the fact of dying, that, as Deleuze would say, and Blanchot, the on meurt, the one dies, the fact of the one dies. But you also add here a material sense, so the bodies of those who die. So I would love to hear more if you can write, or you can talk later, so I can reply properly. But please, questions, comments, if anything was unclear, or objections again. Hello, Peggy, please.
I'm not going to say anything profound, but I was hoping it'll get people starting to talk. When I first read the passage first about him pushing against the body weight of the other person, and this horrible form of intimacy, what you're calling crushing, that everybody has to be in relationship to without them being wanting to be intimate with the other people. It's sort of an imposition on them. I actually thought when he was feeling the person and pushing against him in the darkness, that the other person was perhaps dead. It's what I was expecting to happen. So I was then sort of surprised. It was not that I think as children or whatever, we've all been in situations where we're sleeping with people who would like to get away from us one way or the other. And we can feel that sort of revulsion and sort of almost that shame that you're revolted by humanity, which doesn't talk at all about the void, which I know is the idea of this whole conversation. But I'm hoping somebody else will say something after I stop talking.
No, thank you, Peggy. This is great, actually. I love the phrase, "The person next to me might be dead," and we will return to this after our break in our discussion. How we will discuss how you never know. Perhaps you stand on the right line or the left line, or you are at this point or this other point. You never know who they're going to choose to be placed in the gas chambers. So there's always this contingency in even standing in a concentration camp. But also, I would like to add, because you alluded to another important issue. What we said before is the animate and the inanimate, the dead and the alive, are not strict categories in these cases. And for us, and we will return to this in our third session, I think we need to discuss these terms more dialectically. What is dead and what is alive? And how would, if they stand, if dead and alive stand one before the other, what do they see? Yes, please, Peggy, continue.
I've thought about that, about the Leibniz a little bit, because that state of being, or not exactly being, you're there, once there or whatever, had made me think, when I read this before this, had made me think about it was almost right before creation, or that sort of soup that maybe creation comes out of. Or if I were thinking about it in a more Christian way, it could be almost being in purgatory, that sort of liminal limbo state or whatever. And then I thought maybe, Levinas was thinking about he's not there. And of course, God is I am. So what is going on here? There's no I there anymore. Where is God in this, But, I read the rest of the passages, so I don't want to go on to what I think about what is said later on either.
Thank you, Peggy. This is great. I think we will discuss this in our second session about creation and chaos in Ovid's terms. But what I meant when I said what is the relation between linguistic form and this there is, as a question to you, I said that the there is as language can be seen as what cannot not assume a language. So yes, I see some sort of movement, a dynamic movement of our relation to the there is, absolutely.
Yeah, and see, I put language in immediately because I had to have God saying I am, right? Of course.
Yeah.
Now I can't even say it's me, I am, which would be, or here I am, which is the answer to I am. So as I said, I'll be quiet. And Padre would like to say something. He always has a lot of interesting things to say.
So I see Pradeep, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. We cannot hear you, unfortunately, or at least I cannot hear you.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I had to remove my headphones. I believe it's a mic issue. Sorry. So I think I had one tangent that I haven't thought of very clearly. But it seems fascinating to me. It's I am sort of thinking about what Levinas wrote with respect to the void in terms of categorizing. He mentioned somewhere it's the void of the void. It's the emptiness of the emptiness and not emptiness in itself. And that suddenly triggered a memory I had when I was reading Nagarjuna's text. He's a Mahayana Buddhist thinker. And he mentioned something about, and the idea of void or shunyata, as in the Buddhist term shunyata, is well explored in the Buddhist tradition at large, and it's almost the central thematic of Mahayana Buddhism. And so that similarity, at least in the way the structure of void or of how the void is understood, um, felt very interesting. And this linguistic parallel, I believe, still falls under two different registers of the general thought that is being explored, whereas Levinas speaks more in terms of the horror of or from a necessity of understanding horror. Nagarjuna does not do that in any respect. It's almost as though, at least in the context of Nagarjuna, as much I have understood him, what I think he tries to do is put you in a very similar but yet a different state of limbo by getting rid of the possibilities of answers that could be available to you. And putting you in that sense of limbo. So this is an interesting parallel. Although, I mean, it's very similar even in the end goal, but the registers are very different. I think the internal effect they sort of have on you or what is being explored is very different. And I don't understand why or how that functions overall. So this is the first aspect, which is like very incomplete but interesting that I found as a comment. The second aspect or the second question, totally different, is I was also triggered to think of zombies as a category. And I don't want to ridicule this. I feel that I'm sort of also like complicating it by maybe it sounds, at least the first instinct I had was it might sound ridiculous. I don't know if it does. I mean, I'm sorry if it does. I don't mean to do that. But zombies are a very interesting category because they are the living dead, right? And they don't like it's becoming a zombie is not dying in any way. You live eternally, and that's the punishment of some sort, right? And a punishment for what? Exactly as Levi puts it. and it's just very interesting. I was also, I think a year or two ago, I was fascinated with a lot of zombie films, and I felt, I don't know if somebody has already written about this, but I felt like it's an interesting uh, genre of horror, uh, which which has grown over the past so many years. And I think it's a sort of expression of, of the general collective angst that we have, like the felt helplessness, uh, and the felt purposelessness of our lives altogether. Consequentially, I mean, you being unable to help and therefore unable to find a purpose at large in some way. And I think that those two things strongly resonate with me. Yeah, those are my sort of comments, contributions, questions. I mean,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this. Regarding your first comment, I would love to hear more, first of all. So perhaps you could consider this as a possible theme for your final work, and somehow connected to what we are discussing here. But my reply would be this: but perhaps Levinas, and within the so-called Western philosophy context, is speaking about another sort of horror, the horror of philosophy itself, the horror of thought, that cannot think, at least until Heidegger, about it is a cathexis of subject-object dichotomy, and the horror of philosophy that cannot think beyond the Dasein, so the being toward death. There is something else, and this is the horror of philosophy itself, of so-called Western philosophy. I love your second point as well, and you reminded me of, I think, one of the most wonderful books written lately, philosophical books by Lorenzo Chiesa and Adrian Johnston, God is Undead, where this concept of zombie-like structure is used to talk about God. So I think it's fascinating, and I think it's a very strong point as well. Thank you so much. I think 10 more minutes of questions or discussion is fine. So please, if any clarifications as well, or thoughts even.
I have not a question, I guess it's just like a comment. How like with this thing in Primo Levi about the forced crashedness of bodies, and how like the train is forcing people into this kind of collective body that it's nonetheless stripped of any subjectivity. I'm just thinking about it right now, so that's why I don't have a question about it. But it reminds me a lot of texts written by writers in Chile who were in detention centers during the dictatorship, where at that time the military was using this technique of total isolation, and they were blindfolded almost the entire time. So lots of them wrote about how the moments in which they could feel human contact, because they were not allowed to talk, but when people were coming back from the torture sessions, they would try to touch each other and caress each other. And that was kind of like the only way that they could talk. And yeah, I just find like fascinating that parallel. Fascinating, what the fuck is that word even mean? But yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And again, this is very interesting, and we should start thinking about our projects and what we're going to write about. And this is something yes, fascinating. You reminded me of this book. I have it here, in fact, The Body in Pain, which describes some of these cases in Chile, by Elaine Scary. Her argument is somewhat different than mine. She says basically that the torturers aim to denude the space from objects, and I mean this conceptually. So to return everything within a very minimal point. Again, subjectivity is once more, in another sense, it evaporates. My answer would be, though, that I see it differently, and I tend to follow Levinas in this point, that it is not that objects are effaced, but that subjectivity becomes too large, in a sense. So you cannot exit your subjectivity, in a sense. Your body that is tortured cannot be separated from the outside. It's out there. It's not yours. And in Levinas's sense, there is no exit from your body. Yes, thank you very much, Vera. Anything else? If there's nothing else, we can take a short break. Reconvene in 8-10 minutes. And I can continue with the second part of the presentation, and we will return to the discussion. Leila, is that fine with you?
Yep, that's perfect. Just tell me when you're ready to go again, and I'll resume the recording.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you in a bit. We can start with questions. Samantha, please.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, sorry, I was still putting my thoughts together when we had the questions earlier, but I was really curious about this, and I'm still working my way through Levinas in the book, but as I read through, especially further along where he talks about the encounter with the other, and he talks about time and the other, and for Levinas, something that kind of stood out to me was this idea of, I suppose, this ethical encounter with the other, where it produces this interaction where you see the vulnerability of others, and that kind of now in turn, I suppose he reads this subjectivity in turn as a substitution of sorts or expiation through seeing the other and seeing the vulnerability in the other, which I found super different to Levi and his encounter with the other, and even the reading of Crushed and how he reads these bodies. And I wonder if that also kind of feeds into this impossibility of him being able to step outside of that subjectivity and act responsibly, so to speak, or to Levinas's sense of an ethical encounter. So yeah, I was just curious if that's a misreading, or how sort of putting these two in conversation would spell that out.
I think this is excellent. Yes, I think you're spot on, because this is exactly what I'm going to present now. You reminded me. I read a slight critique of Primo Levi in your thoughts, and you reminded me of a teacher of mine, a Jew. His parents were survivors of the concentration camps, and he was telling us, how could one argue or disagree as a child with someone, with a survivor? Let's keep it there. Let me just phrase a question and keep it there. But I think I will answer to your concerns in the following presentation, and if not, we can come back, Samantha. Thank you very much for this. I think I also owe a response to two more questions in the chat by Ricardo. I find the comment on the death of those who are minors and have not yet a language very interesting. Christopher Finsk has written an excellent book entitled Infant Figures, and this is discussed. What does the death of a child mean? In Latin, as Finsk explains, infans means the one that has not a language. But my question, though, is it's not only children that infants that do not have a language. It might be other people as well, other individuals, even sides of ourselves that do not have a language. And what does this dying imply? Consider, for example, the Mussulman, the Sacred and the Drowned chapter of Primo Levi, and what Agamben has written about the Mussulman. So the ones that are forced to go as far as such a weak state that language vanishes, the possibility of expression vanishes completely. And concerning the other comment on Salò and Pasolini, I told you, Ricardo, that I have a slight problem with this movie, because I don't think it's it cannot go as far as the Sad's 120 Days. Namely the fact that the language, the scenes of the Sad simply cannot be depicted in cinema. It would mean the end of a body, the explosion of a body that cannot be depicted as such. In other words, Pasolini's actors and actresses must remain alive. And I find very interesting that in this movie, if you recall, there are soldiers with their rifles around every sexual or rather beyond the sexual scene. And I take this to be a failure from Pasolini's side. The soldiers, to me, seem to protect and govern this non-depictability of the end of the body, the explosion of the body. So It's rather that Pasolini, with this move, having the soldiers there, is protecting cinema itself. And he is not allowing a void to appear. And this connects to our discussion to some extent. We can have some more questions if there are any. Yes, I think, Peggy, this is precisely our concern here. How to find the language under these extreme conditions, and what sort of language that is. So let's continue. So let's focus on the next slide, another long passage from Primo Levi, and continue focusing on the dream. So what's going on there? When the narrator returns from the concentration camp and starts giving an account of his experience in his mind, no one can hear. It's all about this telling, this accounting for this experience. It seems that there are no ears for this kind of sound. I was telling you before about the dust of the non-survivors. How does one account for the dust? This figure of infancy, we might say, as dust. Can this sound be articulated for human ears? It might be. It might seem that it originates from a mute subject, from a monster. What sort of language is that? Is this language meant for communication? Let's read what Primo Levi is writing here. This is my sister here, with some unidentifiable friend and many other people. This is a dream he's having. They're all listening to me, and it is this very story that I'm telling. The whistle of 3 notes, the hard bed, my neighbor whom I would like to move, but whom I'm afraid to wake. It is an intense pleasure, physical, inexpressible, to be at home among friendly people and to have so many things to recount. But I cannot help noticing that my listeners do not follow me. In fact, they are completely indifferent. They speak confusedly of other things among themselves, as if I was not there. My sister looks at me, gets up, and goes away without a word. A desolating grief is now born in me, like certain barely remembered pains of one's early infancy. It is pain in its pure state, not tempered by a sense of reality and by the intrusion of extraneous circumstances, a pain like that which makes children cry. It is better for me to swim once again up to the surface. But this time, I deliberately open my eyes to have a guarantee of being effectively awake. My dream stands in front of me, still warm, and although awake, I am still full of its anguish. And then I remember that it is not a haphazard dream, but I have dreamt it not once, but many times since I arrived here, with hardly any variations of environment or details. I am now quite awake, and I remember having recounted it to Alberto, and that he confided it to me, To my amazement, that is also his dream and the dream of many others, perhaps of everyone. Why does it happen? Why is the pain of every day translated so constantly into our dreams, in the never repeated scene of the unlistened to story? So it seems here that Levi is trying to recount the story, but it's impossible. There are no ears for this story. There's not a language. It seems that Levi is stuck to a collective dream within the camp, and perhaps a new language is sought. The heritage of the Jew is the whistle of the train. The neighbor whom I'm afraid to wake is not a neighbor. There is no boundary between self and neighbor, as we saw. They are crushed against each other. There are so many things to recount, perhaps too many, but the whistle remains. A remainder between the account that the subject must narrate, that this necessity, this obligation, but the whistle is precisely this, what cannot be recounted. How to recount the whistle? It's silence. The whistle, as a remainder, demands something that cannot be expressed with this given language. And no one can listen, as is clear from the dream. It is simply impossible for a human to listen. The whistle is objectively registered and awaits for the subject of writing to arise. And the subject cannot just be an individual. Levi writes that this dream is the dream of Alberto and many others. Everyone is having this dream. The narrator's dream is a dream without a subject. Not just an objective dream, it's a dream that everyone has, but belongs to no one. They're all having a dream as no one. And this no one is conditioned, as we saw, by the very conditions of the concentration camp. This community of somnambulists, a community that cannot give, cannot receive, but a community that at least opens this plane of expression as it introduces a cut to the everyday for objective history to be registered, for the whistle to remain as a possible genesis of a subject. This is a festival, we might say, of sleepers, and their masks, as Levi describes in this next passage, are children's masks. Let's go to the next passage. One can hear the sleepers breathing and snoring. Some groan and speak. Many lick their lips and move their jaws. They're dreaming of eating. This is also a collective dream. You not only see the food, you feel it in your hands, distinct and concrete. You're aware of its rich and striking smell. Someone in the dream even holds it up to your lips. Then the dream dissolves and breaks up into its elements, but it reforms itself immediately after and begins again, similar yet changed, and this without pause for all of us, every night and for the whole of our sleep. So this community of dreamers is perhaps the only possibility of resistance, a certain resistance that allows for a common history to be registered. The dreamers are able to find a common language within the only allowed space in the concentration camp. They confirm, and this is the most important thing, they confirm in this language that they are not dreaming. In their common dream, they share the knowledge that Auschwitz is real and that there is someone to register it. So it is, for me, at this moment that writing starts. It is through dream work and the conditions that make it possible, the bed frame, the bed companion, the supine position, that they begin to find the fundamental elements for a community, such as language, as Hannah Arendt would say, and space to move. The community of sleepers is not an escape. Dreaming is not just dreaming. It allows the objectivity of suffering to be registered. It is opposed to escape and disavowal. The affirmation of the dream work, contra Descartes, can corroborate existence. What is left of the subject here, of the cogito? And what does, if one is to return to Lacan's claim that one dreams only after the cogito as a subject? The community of dreaming, interestingly, is interrupted by this order of the guard, this Aufstehen. The language of sharing is interrupted by a foreign yet very familiar word in the camp. And let's move on to the next passage. Like a stone, the foreign word falls to the bottom of every soul. Get up. The illusory barrier of the warm blankets, the thin armor of sleep, the nightly evasion with its very torments, drops to pieces around us. And we found ourselves mercilessly awake, exposed to insult, atrociously naked and vulnerable. Day begins like every day. Recall here, as a parenthesis, what the next day means. It's this morgen früh, which is never. And I'm continuing reading from the passage. Day begins like every day, so long as not to allow us reasonably to conceive its end. So much cold, so much hunger, so much exhaustion separate us from it, so that it is better to concentrate one's attention and desires on the block of gray bread, which is small, but which will certainly be ours in an hour, and which for 5 minutes, until we have devoured it, will form everything that the law of the place allows us to possess. Primo Levi writes about how sleep is also almost a protective world. It's a whole world for, and it's perhaps the only world for in this space. And here, I think it was Peggy who told us that the person next to me might be dead. So let's return to this contingency. Primo Levi goes on to explain that the fact that he was not chosen depended merely on chance. And we have two points in the text where this is discussed. Our next slide, we can read from our next slide. At Birkenau, the crematorium chimney has been smoking for 10 days. Room has to be made for an enormous convoy arriving from the Poznan ghetto. The young tell the young that all the old ones will be chosen. The healthy tell the healthy that only the ill will be chosen. The specialists will be excluded. German Jews will be excluded. Low numbers will be excluded. You will be chosen. I will be excluded. So there's no certainty, no category safe from the danger of the gas chambers. In the opening pages also, still in the train chapter, Levi makes clear that fate in the camp is radically contingent. It may mean nothing more than a matter of which side of the train one is forced to step down from. This side in the gas chambers, the other side remains. Categories, as Levi explains, such as man, woman, child, strong, weak, nationality, skilled or not, do not protect anyone. to arrive on the wrong, to step down on the wrong side, is to be chosen for extermination. The narrative, our narrative of the book, is limited and formed by this other side, the schlechte Seite, as it was called in the camp. The side that is not chosen is limited and formed by the one that's chosen. The silence of the other that has turned into dust forms the text. The Jewish experience is inscribed as a positivized negativity, since it becomes human speech and not mere dust within Levi's narrative or within other narratives of these experiences. At the same time, however, the dust must remain, and it remains. Incomprehensibility and silence must remain as part of the narrative, as part of human language. And we can ask here, we must ask, could this silence be part of a declaration of human rights? Does a declaration account for dust? Can ever the language of a declaration account for dust? Or does the writing of such documents disavow the incomprehensibility of dust? The narrator carries the weight of having stood multiple times on the right side, not the schlechte Seite, the side that has not yet perished. But also this side that bears in each instance the death of its survivor, the mere chance of having exchanged places. The survivor cannot simply dust off the other from their shoulder. They are doomed to this act of carrying. And it's this working of probability, another form of torture in the camp, that stains the narrator. Probability is a terra universalis that transforms the subject into anyone else, destabilizing their actual trajectory, their identity, their presence. This presence, however, can never be an actual presence, since the trauma carried and made safe by the mediating probability appears as any other probability. In the futile attempt to have saved the other, to have saved oneself from having beheld the death of the other, to have saved oneself from the working of probability as trauma, the subject destroys their own ground by dissecting their very trajectory, their very text. The subject becomes the termites of its own constitution. So we have seen how the subject is almost destroyed, effaced in the conditions of the camp, but this does not stop there. This is not really a condition of the subject, but the mere application of, as we discussed here, the ocean of probability in the most traumatic scene. The self endlessly plays a shadow theater of the scenarios in which it is they who lose their voice and turn to dust. In this sense, dust forms and transforms the body of the subject. The survivor is no one and everyone. So I think this also answers to Samantha's question about responsibility. Could we talk here about a formal responsibility? This becomes especially clear in the last chapters of the narrative. And in the Google Classroom, I asked you to focus on Alberto. The pages where the relationship between the narrator and Alberto is narrated. So the narrator grows close to Alberto. Alberto's life, however, takes a different turn, or they take the same turn, the turn of the narrative, the two hands, as we discussed in the beginning. Let's go to the next slide and read this passage. And then finally, Alberto came, defying the prohibition to say goodbye to me from the window. We were inseparable. We were the two Italians. Imagine these, I imagine this like two entangled electrons, the two Italians. They continue to work even in distance, even in death. And let's continue the reading. And foreigners even mistook our names. For 6 months, we had shared a bunk and every scrap of food organized in excess of the ration. But he had had scarlet fever as a child, and I was unable to infect him. So he left, and I remained. We said goodbye. Not many words were needed. We had already discussed our affairs countless times. All the healthy prisoners, a few ones, left during the night of January 18th, 1945. They must have been about 20,000 coming from different camps. Almost in their entirety, they vanished during the evacuation march. Alberto was among them. Perhaps someone will write their story one day. So Alberto died in these marches, not in the gas chambers. And Levi is saying that perhaps someone will write their story one day. Who is this someone? What's his story? Alberto is, even in this, even as an impossibility, is this double that shadows the narrative, working as a metaphor for the generalized experience of any other inmate. The human of the concentration camp, as Blanchot writes, is reduced to himself and reveals himself as one who has need of nothing other than need in order to maintain the human relation in its primacy, negating what negates him. And the narrative, for us, must not disavow this experience. It must instead unwrite itself as it is written. And this is Alberto's function. The narrative is therefore always a crushed narrative, striving to be written as it unwrites itself. Something is missing. Something missing that forms it. Levi's narrative must retain some of its embodied inability. This is the responsibility, perhaps, of the narrative itself. The narrative, therefore, must remain an afflicted narrative. Again, Samantha's comments was very interesting before, somewhat critical of Levi's tone. But let's see another unbelievable instance here of an inmate who simply does not understand this formal responsibility, as I called it. This sharing of Schlechte, the right side and the wrong side. So some prisoners are saved, and not all, however, grasp the necessity to transform dust into human speech. They do not feel the responsibility of dust. And this, the most tragic case is this of Kuhn, a prisoner that was saved, at least for that day. And let's go to the next slide. Silence, Levi writes, slowly prevails, and then from my bunk on the top row, I see and hear old Kuhn praying aloud with his beret on his head, swaying everyone his bowl with his spoon backwards and forwards violently. Kuhn thanking God because he has not been chosen. Kuhn is out of his senses. Does he not see Beppo the Greek in the bunk next to him? Beppo, who is 20 years old and is going to the gas chamber the day after tomorrow and knows it and lies there looking fixedly at the light without saying and without even anything thinking anymore. Can Kuhn fail to realize that next time it will be his turn? Does Kuhn not understand that what has happened today is an abomination, which no propitiatory prayer, no pardon, no expiation by all the guilty, which nothing at all in the power of man can ever clean again? If I was God, I would spit at Kuhn's prayer. The prayer here is always the prayer for the other or of the other. Otherwise, it is spit, God's spit. What is God's spit, and who can we blame for such misfortune? It is through this meditation that God is found again, through spitting. God becomes the outsider that spits. It is only then that God finds themselves. Through spitting and not through praying. The spit takes a parallel role for me here to the figure of Jesus Christ. The God can be human through Jesus Christ. God can reach the insurmountable distance to the human only through the figure of Jesus Christ, only through alienating oneself through the figure of Jesus. And the human at the same time can see God as God because God is human. Now the spit has taken the place of Jesus, allowing Levi to make God human again, against Kuhn. To know that in the end, it is through humans that we suffer, and that humanity is our dwelling. This is the role of what we might call the holy spit. And I would like to finish my presentation with a discussion on ethics and the nightmare. I uploaded on Google Classroom a painting by Henry Fuseli entitled The Nightmare. Perhaps I can share it here for a moment. Can I? Yes. So this is the painting. It's a very famous painting depicting the nightmare in a very, stereotypical gender way. But anyway, what our concern is here is the chest. Why is the chest so central as an embodied experience of the nightmare? Why is this demon here sitting on the chest? Ernest Jones, a psychoanalyst, did write about precisely this issue on the nightmare. So it is through Ernest Jones that we can discuss how Levi's dream is the nightmare of nightmare, since it effaces the possibility for an actual nightmare. I'll explain what this means exactly. As Jones writes, Ernest Jones, about the nightmare, the dread that occurs in nightmare and in other unpleasant dreams is best denoted by the German word Angst. For there is in English no term that indicates the precise combination of fearful apprehension, of panic-stricken terror, of awful anxiety, dread and anguish that goes to make up the emotion of which we are treating. So what is this nightmare? The nightmare pertains to the supine position. This supine position that was the entry point for this point of resistance of our festival of sleepers. Does this position make the human animal more vulnerable to such fearful, panic-stricken thoughts? Does this supine position remind of burial, perhaps, as Ernest Jones suggests, or a primordial state that exemplifies a being that cannot be upright? The most studied example is the nightmare of the chest. The sense of oppression or weight, as we saw in Fuseli's painting, at the chest, which alarmingly interferes with respiration. One cannot breathe. For example, when one imagines a monster that rides a demon, whatever that is, and sits hard upon the victims. This chest oppression is usually accompanied by a conviction of helpless paralysis, sleep paralysis as they call it, an incapability of motion, an inability to cry out for help. So what is the significance of the chest nightmare? The nightmare appears to be something that happens to a particular person as a figuration of what is happening to this person only. The dread that the nightmare produces is the dread of the self, the impasse of the self. It is never the dread, the absolute fear for or of the other. One never fears the weight on the chest of another. And simply put, one can never have two chests. In the nightmare, therefore, there is no community. One is faced with the inescapability of their mindness, their chest. In other words, in the nightmare, there is no ethics, as an ethics would be impossible even as a thought, since the condition of possibility for an ethics, the other, is missing. One's chest blocks any figuration of the other. What is played out in the nightmare is the existence, the inescapability of the self. The simple little phrase, I cannot believe this is happening to me. Since no one can replace me in my death, no one can replace me in my nightmare. No one can dream for me, my chest is mine. The nightmare is this originary mood of non-escape from mineness, from the death that cannot belong to me, the non-negotiable fact of mineness. One's chest cannot be shared. Every nightmare is therefore a repetition of this premature burial, the burial that I bear and have been born with. My chest is only a chest, not a border with a second side, another, a border that might be caressed by a hand or touched by another chest when embraced. But this sounds contradictory to what we said before, right? The example of the objective nightmare, right, is possibly disputing this hypothesis, since Levi's narrator, crushed by the sleeper next to him, dreams for everyone, or dreams without himself, without a chest. He dreams objectively. So how is this possible? Is this an outstanding case, a state of exception that allows for a possibility for a nightmare of ethics? I think we need to maintain the thesis that the nightmare pertains to mindness, showcasing, therefore, an impossibility of ethics. And what I believe Primo Levi is describing is the nightmare of the nightmare. The feeling of absolute dispossession of mindness. The feeling that one cannot dream as oneself. One cannot experience the dread of their mindness. And this is the dread of concentration camps, the experience that Levi so powerfully describes. The fact that ethics needs the nightmare of the inescapability of oneself, at least as a possibility. So the nightmare of the nightmare is a formal impossibility for the non-appearance of the nightmare as my nightmare. The non-appearance of minus as destiny. One could say that the nightmare is precisely the nightmare of non-ethics, of the impossibility of ethics. In a nightmare, one is left alone with their chest having no escape. But in such state of emergencies, one experiences the nightmare of the nightmare, an absence of nightmare that does not allow the nightmare to function. A nightmare that brings the night too close, too far from what can introduce it as a signifier within the nightmare. The nightmare of the nightmare is precisely what destroys the boundaries of the self and the other. One can never dream by themselves. One becomes an absolutely othered being, alienated being. A chest crushed by another chest. So this is an embodied impossibility. A dispossessed being that cannot die as a self, but that is always differed and deferred to the death of the other, that cannot be properly experienced, because the death of the other cannot be grasped as the possible death of the self. The nightmare of the nightmare is what asks, and let's end with this, as a non-nightmare to become a nightmare. But there are no ears for such speech. Nothing can be uttered when the whole world is burning. Thus, the nightmare is not a failure. It is still a relation, a failure of signification of the dream arc that can still be heard. The nightmare of the nightmare is the effacement of the possibility of nightmare. And this is suffering, pure suffering. Levi's narrative, however, achieves exactly this: to frame the nightmare of the nightmare and translate it into human speech for human ears. I'm not sure we do have the ears to actually hear this, but it's out there. But something still remains that we cannot hear. But this is not a tragedy. The void remains. So let's stop here. Let's have 10, 12 minutes for questions and our discussion, and then some specifics about the second session and our presentations. So the floor is yours for your input. Peggy, please.
That last passage that you read almost reminds me of Dante descending into hell. Death becomes universal once again. No matter what you're doing to try to forestall it, it's going to pick somebody. And it's almost the medieval image of, you know, the figure that comes and takes whoever they want. But there's no logic, no understanding as to what's going to happen. Not that this wasn't a real experience for everybody, but I think that by the end of what you read, it's operating on a universal level and very religious. Notice the man was glad he wasn't chosen, but he's Jewish, so he is chosen. Regardless, you know, there's a ton of things working and going on in that last passage. That's all I had to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your input. I have to think more about this Dante correspondence. I think yeah. At least the Inferno is somehow connected to our discussion. You know, I do have a problem with what comes after the purgatory, with paradise and this sort of teleological metaphysics. But this is not for now. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think Peggy was saying something else, but your mic was off.
I know I
Otherwise,
have
it's
a dog, so I always turn my sound off immediately. I was saying that it's only the infernal when he's going into hell, and he's saying, I never thought that death could have undone so many. You know, death comes from everybody, and that's sort of the point of all of the experience, even though it's man-made. And maybe the infernal is man-made too.
Great. Thank you, Peggy. I think the silence might mean two things: that all was too well done, or not enough. So please help me with your comments or questions or concerns.
I was just thinking, thinking again about the dictatorship. It's like I wish I could think a bit less about it. But yeah, how I guess it's a broader question also, just like how I think it's interesting, like that parallel of like many like Holocaust literature that was written in conditions of a certain degree of like, let's call it, I don't know, like freedom of speech, or like it's like the possibility of publishing things that were not going to put you in immediate danger, let's say in the 50s or 60s. And to think of how in Latin America during the 70s and 80s, and especially in Chile, because the dictatorship was so long, it is as if, well, you already had it during the 70s, like the these theories in like post-structuralism of the feral of meaning, the fragmentation of the subject, and so on. And it appears that what in Europe was a description of the status of language in places like Chile was somehow empirically imposed upon experience and language. Like the writers that were writing about their experience in the detention centers and the experience of torture were writing in a context of censorship. So then that the fragmentation of narrative and the fragmentation of the staging of the impossibility of finding a language to describe the experience was also a necessity in order to bypass censorship. And yeah, it just seems like a very different condition and context of production that is nonetheless trying to deal with similar subjects.
Yeah, I find it very interesting how censorship almost forms and conceals at the same time an account.
Yeah, I was just thinking how there's like this novelist that I really like, Evangelidis, and in an interview she was like lots of, I guess the two more famous ones, I don't know if some of you maybe know them, I don't know, Raúl Zurita, a poet, and Evangelidis, a novelist. And they were known for being like very obscure, and it's or like in this tradition of like neo-Barroco, which is like just like the proliferation and fragmentation of language. And in an interview, she said like she was asked like why was this so obscure? Because then there has been like this long-standing critique that it's quite elitist and difficult to read. And she was saying, well, I was writing like that in part because I was always thinking this is going to be read by somebody. This is going to be read like this has to if I want this to be published, then it has to be as obscure as I can in order to say anything. And then that kind of literary materials entered this context of like extreme paranoia, where if something was obscure, people would assume immediately, oh, this is talking about political repression.
That's interesting, yeah. There was something similar in other countries. For example, in France, under the Vichy regime, where poets and writers were somewhat free, but under the regime, if not deported, if not Jews. And they were trying, like Aragon was trying to find a language, a form, for the formal limits that would allow his poems to be published without revealing too much. It's exactly what you're saying. Thank you so much. Is there anything else? So, if there's nothing else, I think we can discuss what's going to happen next. In our second session, we will our main reading is Metamorphoses by Ovid, the first couple of books, and we will also add the material that is related to the outcome of this workshop, Jean Genet's Rembrandt text, because it's a great example of what the formal, let's say, requirements for our project. Our project will be a dual project of theory and fiction, let's call it. And we're interested in how these two voices interact, but also we're interested in how you will present these two voices. So when you read Genet, you'll see how he takes two different texts and puts them together. So we'll start next time with Ovid, and then move to Genet and discuss further the details of the final project, so you can already start thinking about it. And also, we have to plan the presentations. So Leila will send you a link. Leila, I don't know if you want to talk about this.
Yeah, so I'll just send a Google form where you can sign up for what reading you want to do. Yeah, so it'll just be groups of kind of 3 or 4. I'll just put people together based on the responses. Yeah, Angel, I'm not sure if you wanted to talk about how you wanted to break down text, or we just have people vote. We just have people select a text. Essentially, we put the groups together, and then would you like to start the next session with a presentation about those texts?
So yes, we will start with the presentations next week. We have a deadline Tuesday or Wednesday for your preferences. And since some of the texts are long enough, they can support 2 or 3, 1 or 2 different groups presenting different parts. So you register and you add your preferences in terms of the text, and then we will inform you of which text you are to present.
Yeah, and then if you guys can just self-organize between each other, that would be great.
Okay. Is there another question? Amelia, please.
Hi, good evening. My question is a bit more about the group's question, because it's my first time doing a course with the new center, and I actually entered a bit later because I only got the email response today. So I just wanted to ask, when it comes to the formation of the groups, is there a space where the students are talking? Is there a group chat or something like? Because I'm a bit lost on how the formation of the groups can be done.
Yeah, so you'll have each other's email addresses through the Google Classroom. But we also have a Discord, which I just put in the chat at the start of the lesson. So if you just scroll up, there's a Discord. You can also organize through there. Yeah, essentially, I mean, especially because we'll put the names, and then of course the new center email is always just first name dot last name. So I think it should be fairly easy to get in touch with each other.
Okay.
But if there's any problems with this, like, just let me know, and very, very happy to kind of put people together.
Okay, because I believe Barto created my account, so I only got I still haven't received material, so that was why I was a bit lost. But okay, I'll see it then. Thank you.
I'll make sure to follow up with the materials if you haven't gotten them.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for today. We can start next time with questions if there are burning non-articulated questions. We can start with 2 or 3 questions and then continue with a presentation of the next text. Again, thank you very much for being here today and for your contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you very much.
Nice meeting you.